Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to another It Is Possible Tuesdays with Sanjo. We haven't been here for a while, but we are back with a bang. My special guest this evening is someone who you will be inspired by and someone who has a lovely, interesting story to share. For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. They are plans for good and not for disaster, to give you a future and a hope. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. It's the second Tuesday. Is it the second? Or is it the first Tuesday? It's the first Tuesday in the last month of the year, and what a year it has been. I hope that as we are coming to the end of the year, that you have many things to thank God for. I'm hoping that you have many dreams, aspirations, and exciting plans for the future. But most of all, remember that whatever plans that you have, place them in the Master's hands because He has great plans for you. But we have to get into our program today. Guest, a gentleman that I've known for quite a number of years. I have been teaching for over 3 decades. And I met this young man during the early part of my teaching career. But I'm going to let him introduce himself. I would like him to tell us his name, where he is from, and just tell us your name and where you're from.
Well, as you can see on the screen, my name is Ryan, Dr. Ryan Wiggan. I am from Kingston, Jamaica, currently residing in California. I think I'm probably, no, almost there. I'm almost splitting my life between Jamaica and California. I've lived consistently in Jamaica up until the age of 25. I think it was 24, 25,
Okay.
and now I'm almost there on the California side. Maybe another 4 or 5 years to go.
All right.
Probably equally match. Yeah, but I'm from Kingston, Jamaica. As you know, we met at Woolmer's. I went to Woolmer's Boys School, my alma mater, an alma
Yes.
mater that I'm always proud to represent or proud to mention the fact that I'm from Woolmer's. I get quite a gist. Whatever we
Oh,
do
yes.
it
Do
well.
well. Yes.
Certainly a mantra in my life over the years, and you know, many experiences there. Meeting you, meeting others, definitely, definitely kind of shaped the foundation, or one of the
Great.
elements in my life that has shaped the foundation. Um, I currently in California. It took me here. I started out working in healthcare in Jamaica at the University Hospital West Indies in finance.
Mhm.
Went along to pursue my degree in finance, and now when I transitioned over to California, I started, to look at my life and restructure. So we are always in the restructuring process,
Mm-hmm.
engineering
Mm-hmm.
and building, because I think that the goal of life is to always make sure that you're living to your fullest potential. And as we traverse this life, as we are on this particular trajectory, we should never be afraid to change. So I'm here now
Mm-hmm.
in California. I work in healthcare, more on the informatics, information system side, and I'm at a point in my life now too where I'm actually, you know, thinking and visualizing the next steps forward.
All right. Now, thank you very much for that. But I'm going to take you all the way back, 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 back. So you're you're from Kingston. Where were
Kingston,
you
Jamaica.
born?
People say
Kingston,
that when
Jamaica.
you say that, they said, yeah, everybody said they're from Kingston. No, I'm definitely Kingstonian. Um,
Where exactly were you born?
so I was born in, well, the hospital, Victoria Jubilee, which many, if they're Jamaicans on the line, they know about the Kingston Public Hospital,
Mm-hmm.
which lives in the center of the garrison in West Kingston. Um,
Mm-hmm.
my first residence as a child was in Rollington Town. I was
Okay.
born and I lived in Rollington Town, or my parents lived in Rollington Town. Those were my first years, formative years living in Rollington Town. Mhm.
What was that experience like growing up in Rollington Town? Which school did you go to? Who were your friends? What were your early experiences?
Yeah, so if I was to start going back as a baby, I can't remember much from the baby age. I know I did go to some daycare called, was it a daycare or like a preschool? I think maybe not
Mm,
daycare. I don't think my parents could afford daycare, so it was some like a preschool. I remember
preschool.
Florizel Glassball preschool or
Mm,
something like that in the region. But then I went to. I think my earliest memories of schooling is the micro practicing all age school, which is right next to Woolman's, you know. So,
yes. All
so my
right.
early years is at the micro practicing all age school. At the time, my principal was Mrs. Wilmot. And when I think about Mrs. Wilmot, I think about one thing that she used to say. She would say at every devotion when we are leaving to go to the, you know, at that age,
Yes.
we were not the kids who were picked up from school. We took the bus, we walked home, you know. So she would always remind us, hardiest picnic, bite rock stone before them dead. Up to this point, I don't know if I really understand
Understood.
or understood what that meant, you know.
Yeah.
I really don't know. But one thing I am sure, it meant something to the fact that, you know what, we should listen, we should obey, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
and pretty much stay out of trouble, you know. Uh,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's what I can remember. But she was consistent with it because she
Mm-hmm.
reiterated from the day we were there to the moment we graduated. You know,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
she would repeat that sentiment. But yeah, micro practicing all age school, good teachers. I mean, not even good teachers, great teachers. You know,
Mm.
really, you know, we had a excellent pass rate. Most of the students who, you know, who left from micro, I'm still in contact with them today. You
Good.
know, and I'm happy for that. You know, many doing well in in their different fields of life or their different areas of interest. You know, so you know, many times when people hear all age school, they try to compare it with prep school. So you know that
Mm-hmm.
primary
Yes.
all age, people would make it sound like all age is like at the bottom of the, you
Mm-hmm.
know,
Mm-hmm.
prep school is a little bit more to the elite side. So sometimes people would say, oh, you know, you go to prep school, you're going to a good school. No, but I want to diffuse that myth. You know, there were good teachers at
Mm-hmm.
all age school, and there were good students at all age school. The difference is just where we lived, where we were from, and what we were exposed to, and what our parents were exposed to as good education, and also from a socioeconomic standpoint, what our parents could afford. You know,
Yeah. But the name Michael is not just any ordinary name.
no, it
When
isn't.
people speak about Michael, they don't just say Michael, they say the Michael.
The
And
Michael, yes,
it has a certain expectation of high standards
yes,
and well-rounded students.
yes,
And
yes.
so the expectation is that
Mm-hmm.
you were poured into and
Mm-hmm.
you much was expected of you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you would
And,
have done common
and the rod
entrance.
was not spared at Michael. The rod was
The rod was not spared anywhere in Jamaica at any time.
right.
And and we have not and it has served us well.
Yes,
It has served us well.
we may not have understood then, but we do now.
Yes, definitely. So you went to Michael and you would have done common entrance.
Did common entry.
Um, and what was your first choice for school?
I don't remember what my first choice for school was. I'm sure Woolman's was always in the mix because my brother went to Woolman's. My brother
Okay,
went to Woolman's before me, so that was my first example of, you know, somebody excelling or going to high school
high school.
and trying to
Yes.
follow in that footstep. I didn't pass my first attempt,
Mhm.
my common entrance. I am not sure. I am not sure why I didn't. I didn't think I was a bad student. Um, a lot of it, I feel like, if I can remember clearly, had to do with nerves, and that was at the mathematics exam. I
Exam.
remember
Yeah.
I didn't finish. I was like, oh my gosh, to where I stopped, and I think it was a lot of nerves.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that usually is kind of like that is a regular theme with me, you know, growing up to that point, you know, always the nerves and the and not
Anxiety.
successful at first try back
Mhm.
then. Little bit better now that I'm older, but I still
Yes.
carry that like, you know, man, I
I
don't know.
want.
Yeah, you think you're going in confident. I'm a good student. I'm like, but the psychological impact can be heavy. But to set the preference for that though is there were also things happening in my childhood that could have contributed also to me not passing my first attempt. Um,
If you don't mind, would you like to share some so that we
yeah,
can have
before,
possibly,
so
yeah.
just before common entrance, one of the major events that hit us as a child, I can remember distinctly, was September 12th, 1988. And I don't know if you remember that date, but that date is
Yes.
synonymous with Hurricane Gilbert. So
Gilbert. Yeah.
when Hurricane Gilbert came along, he pretty much ran amok, to
Oh yes. Oh yes.
and Kingston and Kingston was not spared. We were hit significantly. At that time, once again, kind of giving an example of the socioeconomic status. At that point, I had always lived in what we call a tenement household. So rental, a house, what we call in the US now, multifamily home, right? Jamaica, a tenement yard. So if you know the popular song Dreadlocks Can't Live in a Tenement Yard.
No, yes, yes.
So there were multiple families within that household, and we were we were hit pretty hard, to the fact that we were homeless. Not homeless to the point where we went and slept on the streets, but we were homeless. We were without a
Homeless.
home,
Yeah.
after the hurricane. And so, going to school and stuff like that, there were people trying to help. I lost uniform, I'd lost books, I'd lost, so while you were there, those who weren't hit bad, they were trying to help out.
Support.
And that
Yes.
was in the earlier stages. I don't know, maybe the third grade. So at the first chance of common entrance, you'd be taking it at the fifth. So it was either the third grade or the fourth grade that Hurricane Gilbert had hit.
Yes.
Suffice to say, we're homeless. We went to live briefly with my grandmother. Just pretty much catch. She had like a one-room house. She had two rooms, but one of the rooms was inhabitable because she had a lot of stuff stored in it. She wasn't expecting anybody to come live with
No.
her.
Yeah.
you know, she had years of stuff packed in one. There was no garage back then, or
Mhm.
in Jamaica. So we went, and I would sleep on the couch from days to days, while my mother was back at the house that was damaged, trying to see if they can salvage things, and just being the one to
When,
figure it out and struggle.
yeah. Yeah.
We did get a home after that, so we got another rental property that we went into a couple months after that. Identified one, moved into one, and then within the span of months, maybe a year, yeah, maybe a year, I would say, there was a fire, and it gutted everything, and that was right on the brink of going into common entrance and
Common
preparing
interest.
for common entrance. So again, we were set up, to try and determine, and I can imagine, as a youngster, I would not know, being an adult, I would not have been as um, anxious as my mother or my father, trying to
Yeah.
figure out, what's the next steps, what are we going to do, how are we going to get through this. Um, and so we had the fire, and then you went through that stage of, again, people trying to help you out, get you uniforms, get you back your well, I was coming from school when the fire happened, so I still had one uniform on. I still had my bag and stuff on me because I came off the bus only to see the smokes, and by the time I got there, somebody said, somebody on the street said, "That's your house," and I was like, "What?" And ran there, and everybody was there, the fire truck and everything. But through it all, there were lessons there too, because I still remember distinctly. Um, Somebody said to my mother, um, it's almost as if they were trying to console her, and they were trying to say, "Man, it's so sad that this had happened," and whatever. And her response was shocking. And I remember as a kid, I don't know how I had that feeling, but it was shocking because she said, um, "It is what it is. I'm just glad it didn't happen in the night." Um, and they said, so the person said to her, "Why?" "Oh, because the fire started in Ryan's room." Right. The fire, there was an explosion. It started from the tenants above. Their kitchen was above my
Your
room.
room.
And so something happened there. I think they said something like the cylinder and anything, like the fire probably started in there, it fell, and then it exploded. That's what caused a mass impact. And so the explosion started. So there was nothing in my room to salvage. Nothing. Nothing. Lost everything, you know. Um, and so that was one of the things that I remember my mom being so, and all she could think about, rather than the
It's
negative,
you.
about the positive. The positive was that, and I think that kind of set the foundation for me. Sometimes when there are negative things happening around me, try to see what the positive is. So I was happy to be there to just, hear that, and I never forgot it, that was her reaction. And so by the time we got through that and settled in and stuff like that, I know it probably could have. I can't pinpoint for sure what that was a reason, but it's very possible, because I said nerves and everything and, just didn't get to prepare well. I don't believe. And so the second opportunity that I got, of course, I
Nail.
couldn't. This is the time now when I go through the motion of, listen, I can't disappoint my mother. I can't disappoint anyone, and I made sure. So no, I wasn't preparing for my what I knew. I knew I could do the material. We practiced them all the time in class.
Oh,
All
yes.
I had to do now was get my mental capacity clear, where I'm like, hey, you good, it, just get through it.
Yes,
And
yes,
so I made
yes.
sure by the time that timer went off, that the exam was done, all 100 questions were complete. If you remember, we were doing 100 questions per,
Yes, yes.
and I said, if I finish 100 questions, I should be in good
Should
stuff.
be
But I think
lovely.
then I remember, I'm sure Wilma's was always, and I think between JC and George's was probably
Okay.
JC, because I had a cousin who went there, and I was like, oh, I could end up to school with that cousin. And then
Yeah.
George's, because George's was right next door to my
Good.
church
Good.
that I grew up. George's was right in front of North Street, Seventh Day Adventist Church.
Yeah. You're relating the experience,
Mm-hmm,
two traumatic experiences,
mm-hmm,
Gilbert,
mm-hmm,
and that is it's interesting because um you were in primary school.
mm-hmm.
I was in uni when Gilbert came,
Right,
and it was devastating.
right,
It
right,
was devastating. I was living off Hagley. Was I live? No, I wasn't living off Hagley Park Road. I was living in Portmore at the time,
oh, right.
and we were transported to
Mm-hmm.
Upper Camp.
I wouldn't,
So
because
we
you're
stayed
right
at
next
Upper Camp.
yeah, you're next to the water. Yeah.
Exactly. And people weren't sure what would be happening and so
Right,
forth. And for us, it was devastating because we were at camp and we could see the trees
right,
moving from left to right. And then when
right.
we went on the road, the
Mm-hmm.
devastation was such. And I remember that part of what I did at uni was to join the Red Cross to give out parcels and things like that. And we were
Oh,
able to travel the country and see
oh,
the devastation. But I
yes,
knew Kingston was really hit because we walked on the road and we saw the road full of
yes.
all sorts of things.
Yeah, we were
And
out for a while.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, we had water. We had to be getting water transported to us. There was
Mm-hmm.
no electricity and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So imagine for you as a child how much of a traumatic experience. And interestingly, we didn't know words such as trauma. We didn't
No.
think about those things. It was just, oh, we have hurricane, we deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
But those things would have impacted you. And in my sojourn in education, we talk about adverse childhood experiences.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And that would have had an impact on you in any way. You would not have been prepared for any exam. You would have still have been
Yeah,
dealing with.
exactly. Right.
Yeah.
And that's
So
exactly why I said it that way, because you don't know. You don't know the things that, and like you can say it now as an adult, but you're still not a
exactly,
100%
hindsight.
sure. But it is very possible, based on, like you said, researches, based on how these things have been translated and studied, that could have impacted me back then.
Yeah. But for me, the most telling traumatic experience that you've had and didn't even realize that you had it was the fact that you missed death.
Mm.
So
Through
I
the
mean,
fire. Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
you're thinking, oh, had that been in the night, as your mom said, or had I been at home,
Right.
had
Right.
I been in my room,
Right.
you know, it would have been a memory.
Yeah. And it
Or,
actually is something that I've never taken for granted, because the older you grow up and you think about it, like, wait a minute,
ooh,
my room.
that was close,
Like if you were
you
there,
know?
like you'd be gone without
Exactly.
even a second thought.
You
Yeah.
know, it means that from a very early age, the Lord has had his eye on you, and
Mhm.
you have been covered from a very early age.
Mhm. Yeah.
You
I don't take it
have
for
you
a
and
friend.
the very fact that you said you don't take it for granted is
Right.
testimony.
Because it's interesting that you start with that scripture. I don't know if you start every show with that scripture, so I don't know if God led, but if you started every show, it was interesting because this is what is on my desk,
Oh, awesome.
and I don't
One
even
of my favorite.
this cup, and I don't even drink out of it. Just for the verse, I keep it on my
Yes,
desk.
yes,
Or the plan,
yes.
and that's almost like translating to what I said. I learned from my mom. Rather than looking at the negative, right? Look at the positive, because as you can see, like I said, of course, you hear people have that discussion all the time, and there are people who don't want to believe in God because they're like, oh, why does God allow this to happen, and why does
Mhm.
God allow that to happen? And I understand that, because then if you don't have a close relationship with somebody, you don't understand the character of that person. And so one of the things about this verse is that it reinforces the character of God. That his plans are really not to harm you. So sometimes
Yes.
understand that there are people out there trying to do things. And there were rumors out there when I was a child about a shady landlord who was trying to get insurance money, and this was all orchestrated, which was
Ah,
possible. I couldn't prove it, but then I said, you know what? But that was not God. You know what I'm saying? Clearly, that was not God, because if somebody's trying to, he just made sure that he made sure that when it happened, the time it did happen, that everybody would be protected who did not deserve
yes.
to be harmed. And there are countless things happening in society today that we ask the question, why do these things happen, or why do these things happen? To good people. And there's so many things that we would not be able to. But I do believe in that he definitely is not trying to harm us, or to cause us to prosper.
And the Bible actually says that God does not wish that anyone should perish, but that
Perish.
all should come to eternal life. So the bad things that happen are the orchestrations of the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to recognize that the enemy is out there like a roaring lion
Hmm.
seeking to devour us. So the bad things that happen has nothing to do with God. It has
Correct.
to do with the enemy trying to discredit God. But
Right.
we constantly give him glory for the things that we pass through
Mhm.
and can give him glory and praise for, because your life, that's a powerful testimony.
Right.
So you were at school, the house was gutted, you were safe, your mother recognized that the Lord was in charge. How was school for you?
You
How
mean,
was Wolmer's? How was Michael?
oh,
How,
after,
how
so after Michael, yes, then we had the common entrance. We left. Like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed Michael. Those were formative years. As I said, I'm still in contact with many of my Myconians.
yes.
Have good relationships with them still. But one of the great memories too is just their focus on education and making sure that
Mhm,
we were able to thrive in a society that
mhm,
present
mhm,
us significant challenges. I would say that they didn't make it easy for us. Um, that somebody, and let me say it in a way in which, when I say make it easy for us, is to understand that when we go out into society, we will be up against many things. And so, or today we live in a society where people, I see it all the day, where we reward kids for any and any little thing. Back then, we were able to establish, everything is not going to go our way, right? And then when you did something wrong, there is a consequence, right? Even if you fail, there is a consequence to failure. Things like that are reiterated in our mind. So we're not going
mhm,
out into the world thinking that it's all blue, flowers and
mhm, mhm, mhm.
we can't do anything. Once we go our way, we can't do anything wrong, or nothing wrong can befall us. And
Mhm,
I've already experienced things going wrong as a child, you know. and was very cognizant of what was happening. But because again of those examples of that educational foundation, I kind of had a better grasp of like, things will not all things are not linear. They won't go in a positive direction like this, just straight.
Yes,
You
yes.
got ebb and flow. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
through life. You can make 4 steps forward and then you're taking 2 steps back, and that's all right. But it's understanding that life is a journey. It's not an event. It's something that you have to constantly just push forward. And I think that's what they taught us at Michael. That's what Miss Wilmot was constantly reminding us. Like I said, I don't know what she clearly meant by how they speak me bite rockstone before them dead. But I think she wanted us to understand that we have to ensure that we are on the right side of things, in terms of our attitude, in terms of our discipline, in terms of our focus. And so that is why I don't think I've ever forgotten that. You forgot many things, but I can never forget that.
Yeah.
Um, and I remember too, just before leaving Michael, the graduation song that we sang was, it says, "Do you know where you're going to? Do you like the things that life is showing you?" That also was another thing that was like, oh my gosh, something else that's just planted. I never forgot that song. Never. And the funny thing is, when I say not forget a song, I'm not saying not forget a song to that I can sing it. I'm saying
Yeah.
meant to me. There were times when I was when I went to Woolman's. So we can transition to Woolman's now, because when I went to Woolman's, that also was another. You could say that was a culture shock. That was that was just something different. No,
Different.
no, no, your understanding of society and your exposure to society has expanded,
Mm-hmm.
and you're in this box and you're trying to navigate what you're now experiencing. You're talking about, now you're not just talking about middle class, working class kids
Mm.
to school,
Mm.
good blend. No, when I was at Woolman's, we were at you had kids whose parents were at the top end of society. And you had kids who were like way at the bottom, and you had the working class. So you had this good mixture of society and just trying
Yes.
to to blend in.
But
And so you would have to be careful as a youngster growing up, because remember, I think Adler psychology teaches us that, um I think, is it Adler where it talks about the identity crisis,
city. Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
That a kid doesn't understand until they're about 14 years or up what they're trying to be or who they're trying to be. So we misinterpret when we see kids and we think that kids are acting out, or we think that that's the kid going through the process of trying to figure out who they are.
Yes.
So I
Yes.
was there. So you're talking about a kid who went to school at 11 years old. So you're going through those years where you're trying to figure out who you are. And I think that was the highlight of Wilmer's for me, trying to figure out who I am. No, you're seeing things and you're hearing things that you never knew existed in souls and all of that. And it was a strong competitive environment. And I
Oh
tell you,
yes.
in first form, when I went to first form, now you get all these books and all these things. Now you got to add reading to your thing, read a little bit more, um, which was challenging. Um, and so my first year, my form teacher was a Seventh Day Adventist. I don't know if that
Really.
was God's doing, but she picked on the two Adventist children that was in the class. When I said picked on, meaning that it's like she expected more from us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
so I was singled out the way, so much so that sometimes, yeah, I'd like to see you after class. And she's there. Her name was Miss Campbell. I've never seen her since
I
since
know Miss Campbell.
Miss
I
Campbell.
know. Short geography.
Okay, yeah. And I was like, I haven't seen her in years, but if I see her, I would say thank you, because at the end of the day, she was like constantly like, you guys can do better. You can, and you got to set an example. I'm like, set an example? We're kids. And like, well, I didn't say it that way, but I'm like,
Yes.
I feel like you're asking for a whole lot, Miss Campbell. But first time I didn't do well. I didn't do well.
Mm.
I,
Mm.
I struggled. My grades weren't great. And so it was second form. Now, when I went into second form, Miss Campbell is still pouring into us. And I had a competitive moment because then I realized, and you would know this, there was a fast stream that they had a fast stream in third form that they put all the brightest of the brightest into that class. I don't know if it was at that time. I don't know if that was a good thing. I don't know if they still do that. But I was like, man, I started to get competitive in my mind. I said, man, that would be such an achievement. I made it to the bright class. But I'm like, I'm coming from way back because
Mhm.
I got some bad grades in first form.
Yeah.
Trying to navigate, trying to fit in. I had kids who were teasing me because I didn't wear certain clothes. I remember back then in first form, my parents couldn't afford, my mother couldn't afford Nikes, Adidas, Reebok, certain jeans, certain clothes,
Jan Sport.
yeah, John Sports. So kids would tease you. Kids would look at you differently, and to some extent try to bully you. And I think I survived for the main reason that I stayed true to myself.
Uh-huh.
I stayed true to myself. And I think I really believe that my friends respected that. And I said friends because after a while they became friends because they realized that, we're teasing this guy and it doesn't bother him. Like so
Give
rather,
up.
yeah, rather than it just say if you can't beat them, join them. So it's like
Yeah.
some of my closest friends, one of my closest friends, who was somebody who was a bully. And he was trying to bully me, but he realized it was working. So eventually we became good friends.
Yes.
To find out after a while that his mother was Adventist. So I ended up at his home and find out his mother. And then his mother is always talking to me about you need to guide Kevin. That was his name. You need to guide Kevin. I said I'll try. So I said before, so throughout school, yes, he probably would be seen as the tough one, the bad one to some people. Um, and then I was a party, but we it's like it wasn't a match, but he was still my friend. And I
Yes.
never negate that. And up to this day, I got a call from him recently. He was in a bind, and I was like, yeah, and he said, you're the only person who responded to me. I said, because we're friends. You don't give up on your friends. It don't matter what
No.
path we take, or paths are different or stuff like that. And your mom always said, please look out for Kevin, and I took that to heart. So
Mm.
those things. So I'm trying to navigate that. So second form, man, I tighten up, started trying to find help everywhere I could. I was not good at math. I find a neighbor who was excellent. He was on the Kingston College Winning Schools Challenge quiz team.
Oh,
And he was like the math genius. Every time you watch it, you're like, "Damn, this guy don't get no math question wrong."
so wrong.
So he was in the community and he was like a good while. So I'd have to walk like maybe a 10-15 minute walk to get to his home because I had a good friend from North Street who lived on that street who was his neighbor. She said, yeah, he can help. And let me talk to him. His name was Dave Clark, I think was his name, or Dave Lewis. And I went. So he helped his mother in a shop. So he said, if you come, you have to come and sit with me in the shop. So we'd be trying to do math and him teaching me. I'm on the other side of the where
The counter.
the counter, right? So I'm on the other side of the counter and him trying to teach and people coming in and disrupting and say, but let me tell you, he was so good at explaining the things to me. And because it was like a one-on-one thing, I got really better at math. And so my neighbor then I started working with her with history and reading more and discussing history and stuff like that. I'm like, I'm getting in this fast stream. I'm getting in it. And I'm like, I gotta do it. I feel like I feel like I have the know-all and I feel like I have that ability to succeed in what I was doing. And that was it. And I got into the fast stream. My grades were better, way improved with Miss Campbell constantly in my ear, me going out to look for help, and a lot of those you don't realize was such valuable lessons for being an adult later. Think about it. That thing where you tighten up. Sometimes you just have to tighten up and you just have to focus. So a lot of times I can go back to those things. If I end up in a situation, is like, what did I do when I was in this bind? I can always go back to my closet and my historical closet. How did you survive this, Ryan? Every time you go, but so everything that you've been through in your life is supposed to make you a lot better. Everything that you have experienced and you've exposed, it should give you it should give you the blueprint for dealing with the next issue. So that was what was happening. So tightening up, seeking others for help, all the help, because I have friends today who some of them said they didn't like the teacher and the teacher didn't teach them good, or teacher, and I said, well, I look back on it and I say, yeah, but you still had control over how you did, because at the end of the day, it's your life, And as a youngster, I understood that I need to go get help, and I went to go and get help. So wherever I found somebody was better at something than I was, I tried to get close to them and try to get help. And that's how I ended up in the class. Then I faced another issue by getting into that bright class, that fast stream. Man,
Competition.
oh gosh, the competition was something I was not prepared for, and I did not know how to navigate it. I was playing cricket for the school, so a lot of
Mm-hmm.
was taken up with cricket. But then when I was in the class, there was something that I learned that I was like, what? So these guys were some guys were just constantly doing well. And I'm like, we're listening to the same teacher, I'm in the same class. Why am I struggling? And I remember one of the guys said to me, um, oh, we don't just do class, we have extra lessons. We do
Mm-hmm.
extra lessons with so and so at Georgia, or we do extra lessons with so and so at Campion. And they went to all these different people, that they can get even more one-on-one focus. And that was what surprised me, because it's like before the lesson was even taught, I feel like these
Yeah.
guys are on fire,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it just, I struggled. I sunk under that pressure, because it's like my parents can't afford to take me to no fancy
Yes.
tutor. And back then, tutors, if for them, the tutors that they were getting cost a lot of money. When I
Yes.
talk about, I can't even remember the dollar amount. I just know the dollar amount was something I wasn't going to bring to my mother. No, we're not. Yeah. And I
Yes.
was aware. I said a lot of times too, I realized that kids don't understand the economic situation of their home. Um, or they print, or maybe they just ignored it back then. But I didn't, because I realized how hard my mother worked. And I realized that she was willing to give anything that she had to make us, and she worked. She worked a full-time job. My father also worked a full-time job. My father was there, but my father wasn't reliable. Um, my father struggled with what I considered a disease as I got older, which is alcoholism. Something that he was not able to shake. He just got worse and worse over time. So I struggled with that too. I struggled with being at Wilma's and seeing all these fathers coming in, these fathers who were doing well in society. Don't mean that they were perfect, but I mean they were there. So I
Yes.
struggled with that a lot, not being able to have my father around. I played cricket and he never came to a game. And I would see some of the fathers who came to the games, and made me feel some kind of way,
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
experience. So sometimes, we grew up in a society, and especially coming from a lifestyle where, you're in what we call the garrison, or
Mm-hmm.
by the garrison. So a part of that survival is being tough. So you don't show, you're not supposed to show emotions. But I remember back then, even now, I'm still emotional about things like that. Seeing individuals who have that type of relationship, who have that type of relationship. And so that was a struggle. So seeing all, like I said, seeing all these families, these different, I'm like, I didn't know what was rich. I didn't understand rich until
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, these are rich kids, And then you had kids who were like poor kids too, and then sometimes you got confused because the dynamic started to shift. You see where the poor kids were trying hard to do well in their schoolwork, but you saw where the kids who had everything were trying to be like the poor kids.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It made no sense. You don't understand where they're from and what they have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. But you're trying to do the things that they are trying to avoid doing, or trying to get
Yes.
away from. And that was interesting. So that competition just sunk me, and I struggled in fourth form, to the point that CXC wasn't very successful, and I had to repeat fifth form. Because by the time sports
Well,
formed such a big foundation that it really affected before. I couldn't be.
mhm, mhm. How did that affect your self-confidence?
Oh yeah, well done because now you definitely think that you're not the person you think you are. You really start to wonder, yo, am I what they considered bright or intelligent? And so that there was a struggle because for me, I wanted to do well. You know, I wanted to do well, and there were, but you know what? Even then, you have people pouring into you about how bright they think you are. There were fellow students at Woolman who were telling me, "Oh, you're a smart kid," and I'm like, "Huh?
Yeah.
Pretty, you don't know that's struggling in this class, you know." But people observe you and people see you, and
Yeah.
and people, and so one of the good things about life is when people let you know what they think of you.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
that's one of the good
Yes.
things in life,
Yes.
and sometimes what you're not able to see, other people are able to see it, and sometimes what it means now is that when you hear it, you have to go now, look into it and see if you see what they,
Funny.
if you're constantly hearing the same thing, that might be, you might need to take it seriously, that that's who you are and believe that's who you are.
And that's why we always encourage people to say positive things to their children.
Agree.
We encourage people to pour positivity. Nowadays, we talk about affirmations. When we
Hmm.
were growing up and when I was a teacher at Woolmer's, we
Right.
affirmations, but we always tried to ensure that whatever we said to children
Right.
was something that would help them to see themselves in a better light,
Hmm.
in a positive light.
Yeah.
Um, your conversation here is the fact that you were resilient.
Hmm. Hmm.
You had a strong streak of resilience, but you also had a strong streak of independence. Because
Hmm.
I see you here saying, I found somebody who could help me. So you weren't afraid to ask for help.
Hmm.
You weren't afraid to uh, recognize that in order for you to do well, you had to align yourself with people who
Hmm.
could challenge you and pull you where you wanted to go.
Right.
And you put yourself in that sphere where
Right.
if I know somebody who can do something well, I'm going to walk 15 minutes. I'm going to stand out at the shop. I'm going to take the interruption because somebody's pouring into me
Mhm.
and I'm availing myself what they have to offer.
Yeah.
And
And
you haven't,
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah. I was just thinking that in the era that you were born and grown up in, you didn't think about entitlement.
Mm-mm.
It's not something that you would have been exposed to. You'd have been exposed to there's something that I need,
Mm-hmm.
there's something that I want, and I have to find a way to acquire it.
Right.
Because in order for me to get to where I want to go, I need to have that particular item, that tool, that strategy, whatever it is. But you always had a goal.
Right.
You always recognized that there was something else, something better, something outside of your circumstance that you wanted to attain, and you reached for it and you found a way to acquire it. And I find that positively inspirational.
And a couple years ago, again, that I used to walk around and I used to post this thing where it dawned on me. I said, life is about something better. Like I said, this life is just a journey. It's not an event. It doesn't happen in. It's not a movie that you go for an hour, you see the beginning and the end, and that's it. It's a journey.
Mhm.
It can always be amended. It can always, you can always choose to go back to something that you didn't explore before, but you probably feel like that's a fit for you. But the critical part of that is environment and how you choose, and
Mhm.
that's what I was trying to mention that you said is how we choose our environments and the environments that we choose to affiliate ourselves with. But one of the things I got um, more enlightenment about is what we call an environment, because an environment to many is just is your physical surroundings. But I want
Mhm. Mhm.
environment is more than your physical surroundings, right? Your environment can be a social environment. Your environment can be an intellectual environment. Like for instance, if I read a certain kind of books, the books that I read form my environment because that's where I'm getting my knowledge from. That's that's
Exactly.
where I'm getting my foundation from, right? As you know, as Christians, if we go to church and stuff like that, that community is our environment. That's the thing that shape us. And so
Yes.
at that time, even when I was going to Woolman's, if Woolman's was my only environment, I would probably be a different Ryan. But
Mm-hmm,
unlike
mm-hmm,
many
mm-hmm.
people, I can't talk about Woolman's and I don't talk about North Street SDA Church.
Mm-hmm.
Be in
Mm-hmm.
the church family. And here again, that was not my decision. That was a mother's decision. The irony about it is that my mother didn't go to church, but she sent us to church.
Yes.
And she didn't have to because even my grandmother was the one who went to church, and we were the only of my grandmother's children that our mother sent us to church with our grandmother. Of the 8 kids, right? We had other cousins who became Seventh Day, and their parents became Seventh Day Adventist. But she decided that even though we're going to church. So that also formed another big that formed a huge basis. So now here you are, right? You're going to church, you're involved in church. Like I told people, life for me was home, school, church, back home. Back then, we had something to do every day at church. I'm like, is this cool? We had a play to practice for a choir to do something. There's always something.
Find us.
Church kept us active. And again, I was walking distance from church. So we would walk from Woolman. When Woolman's is over, some people going God knows where. I was going to church because I have a practice. I
Yes.
some of the things that
Yes.
my friends encountered and did back then, and I'm like, wow, I was at church. you know,
Mhm.
luckily I was at church, and the times when I was,
Uh-huh.
I found myself in sticky situations. I was like, see, that's because I'm not at church. I should have been at church, but I just, you know, um, so that also formed the basis, right? And so as I go along and you start growing, then you start realizing that hey, you're looking at life, you're looking at yourself. I think resilience is one, but always always that goal to find the best version of yourself,
Yes. Yes.
living up to
Yes.
your fully. Like there has
Yes.
to be some reason, and I think that that is what kind of um even today as we sit here, that is something that I struggle with because I want to be able to live to my fullest. I want to be able, like Paul, to say, when it comes to that point, that I would
I
not
have
be
finished
afraid of death. I have finished, I've lived the life that I was supposed to live, right? You know,
purpose.
yeah. I fought the fight. I fought many fights, but have I fought the fight? You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
and and,
Yes. Yes.
and so I look at things that way. And so environment was very essential. Okay, environment is what shapes you, right? I'm not good at agriculture, and I'm not good at gardening or anything, even though I always say I was going to take it up, but I never did, right? But one of the things I do know is that certain things cannot grow in certain soils and under certain
Yes.
conditions, and under that's environment. So you would flourish based on, and so you have to make sure that from a day-to-day basis you have the right environment, or you're within the right environment that will help to pull out or bring out the best that is within you, right? And remember,
Yes.
it's there. It's just for us to pull it out. It's not something that we have to fight hard to get or we have to go buy. It's there. It's just for us to connect to that true potential.
And also have it within you, because quite a number of people are not self-aware,
Right,
recognizing that they have what it takes to achieve and to make progress and to do well and to be the best them you
right,
know
right.
um you you went to Wolmer's. You said you didn't do well in your
Six.
GCSE CXC at the
Mhm.
time, and you repeated fifth form. When you repeated, what happened? What change occurred? And what were the next steps?
Well, like I said, I went back to my closet. I was still playing cricket. Cricket took up a lot of my time, but I went back into my closet. I'm like, how did I survive this back in common entrance? How did I survive this?
Mhm.
trying to get into the fast stream, right? Well, I know I have the blueprint. I just have to do it because sometimes it's sad when people do things and they have done well and they don't go back to what made
That
them succeed.
do well.
Why is that the case? You know, I was listening to, I don't know if you watch basketball, but I was listening to one of the basketball greats, God rest his soul in peace, Kobe Bryant.
Kobe.
I wasn't a big fan of Kobe at the time, but I can't deny the legacy that he's left in terms of his demonstration of hard work and resilience, right? Which is
Yes, yes.
admirable. And one of the things he said is somebody asked him a question about when he's not doing well in a game, like he's struggling to shoot or he's struggling to score, right? But then he takes that last shot to win the game and he makes the shot. Like, what is going through his mind? And he says in that moment, he knows that he's done this 1,000 times. So he goes back to his closet. He looks at his hard work. He looks at in his mind, he's saying, I've worked hard on this every morning. I've taken this shot 1,000 times, right? I've won a game the exact same way before. So he goes back, and I've never forgotten that. So every time you get to a situation where it's like, how did I cross over that hurdle, right? So I just went back to the closet, got the help, right? Tighten up. I got to focus a little bit more on certain things, and then I set an attainable goal, which attainable goal was back then. I was not thinking about sixth form. Like, who knows about sixth form? My brother, I don't have nobody in my family that went to sixth form. I didn't even know what it meant, right? But it seemed like something that puts you up there, right? So a lot of
Yes. White shirt.
I was doing just challenging myself. Can I get to sixth form? Woolmer's, right? Then I was hearing Woolmer's is one of the best sixth forms. I'm like, people know I went to Woolmer's sixth form. Like, yeah, like I'm like, all right, game on. Cricket, I don't care, whatever, I'll play. And at the same time, I'm working towards. And I did. And the same thing. So what it made me realize is that I know the steps, right? But some way, somehow, I always
Nation.
myself, got distracted again, forget what got me there, right? And so, okay, it's fine. I forgot what got me there, but ain't nothing stopping you from going back.
Going
Go
back.
pick
Yes.
that up and start moving forward again. Like I said, you can make 4 steps forward and you can either take 2 steps or even a giant slide, but you keep going
Mhm.
again. You keep moving forward
Yes.
again. And that's what I did. And I passed. I got my subjects. I got into sixth form, and that was it. But sixth form two was where I felt like at an impasse because to me, at some point, I was there to play cricket because at that point, I didn't even know what's next. No, let's
Yes.
set the background for that. My mother had a third grade education. My father never, I don't remember where his education stopped, but I know he was in the police force at a young age, right? Maybe whatever the time was that you were eligible, and I hear you were very eligible at a young age to go into the
Young
concealed
age.
force back then, right? So he went in early. Um, and so there was no conversation, nobody know. You couldn't sit in a family. That was one of the challenges I had because here you are in Wilmers with people who had parents who had degrees. My parents had no idea what a degree is. So we weren't
Mhm.
having that. So I was fighting. I was fighting to the point where I'm like, I'm just trying to make the right steps. I don't know how they're going to be ordered, right? Um, but I'm just trying to make these steps, and I'm just still trying to pull forward. And I remember in sixth form when they were they were writing up. Everybody was writing up college forms and everything to go to. I didn't. I just stood there watching everybody. The reason why I didn't sign up college, because not to say I didn't want to go to college, I didn't understand it. And people would find that hard to believe. Like, I really didn't. Nobody talked about college in my home. So I'm like,
Yes.
maybe they were fighting for this goal from way back when. So when I got older, I'm realizing, what if I knew or understood the college from um, from the moment I entered first farm, that after sixth
Early.
farm, I mean, that after you get to high school, your next step is college. I was just thinking that
Yes.
so my goals were like short-term goals, like, oh, I need to pass the common entrance. It's a thing. Yeah, pass the common entrance in high school. You need to get your CXCs. Okay. right. You know, as far as my mother's knowledge was, she just want you went to school. She wanted to make sure you did well in school.
Mhm.
Doing well was relative. Doing well is not like she was thinking doing well so you could get in college. Doing well means staying out of trouble, right?
Trouble.
If there is something to pass, you pass it. She didn't know what, she didn't understand whether it is A, where she didn't understand the concept of GPAs, right? So there was nobody within that environment that was, yes, I went to Nazi where I saw people matriculate to college, but there weren't a lot of programs back then telling us about those things for the kids who
Yeah.
like, oh, because I think many people didn't even understand that. So my success, a lot of people revel in my success back at North Street at the time because they knew where I was coming from.
Was coming from.
They were like,
Yes.
yeah, I'm proud of you, and oh man, and they can't believe. To many it could have been a shock,
Mhm.
because many people coming from where I'm coming from, or or not being attached to a certain family, this is like, oh, and
And
remember,
happen.
I didn't just pass to go to any school. I passed to go to a good school because everybody going to this, a Wolmer's, a Campion, a Kingston.
Mm-hmm.
That was it. Anything below any of those traditional high schools is almost like a failure. People don't want to do it home, right? So
Yes.
I knew there were things attached to that were successes, but I didn't have,
Yes.
and I guess this is the key word that we're coming to. We had no idea what a vision for my life was. I didn't. Nobody vision plan in my family, and we didn't have those exposures. We just didn't. Even at
Yeah.
work, I
Um,
told somebody that I wish they had more to introduce us to careers and what we can do with our lives or college. I didn't.
mhm.
Hmm.
Yeah. Things have changed a lot in terms of education and what schools are presently doing for their
Right,
students. There's more around planning for the future, and there's more around exposing children to um, environments that they're not usually in contact with. And
right.
so you have students going to college fairs, you have students going to employment fairs, you have students being having visitors come in to talk about their different careers, and so that they can have an idea that these things they can experience it even if they've not been exposed to it before, and
Mhm.
therefore there's something else
Yes.
beyond what you've been accustomed to. So your parents were selling in the arcade,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
oh, you don't have to sell in the arcade. You
Oh,
can actually do a business degree. You can do accounting. You could go into the emergency services. You don't have to sell in. So people are now doing that because they recognize that school should be the launching pad,
most
not
definitely.
just for certain um, careers, but
Mhm.
it should open it out widely so that children can be exposed to a much wider sphere and opportunities.
Right.
You have then finished, you've done sixth form. What next?
So when I finished sixth form and I didn't understand what was going on, I was like, okay, I already made up my mind. But then there was another significant moment. My aunt came over one day and said to my and asked my mother. My mother didn't know I was around, so she was like on what you call a porch veranda at the time. I was like in the living room area. My aunt came over, and my aunt just came up to this question. So Ryan is going to college. What is Ryan? She said, and then I heard my mom said, I don't know what he's going to do, I really don't know. But and I don't know how I'm going to afford college if he decides to. It showed me two things, financial concerns. Clearly my mother didn't understand. She'd never thought that far in terms of
Mm-hmm.
um and so I made up my mind right there and then. I said, well, I guess I'm not going to college. Because I really didn't understand. I said, because going there would mean that I know what I wanted to do. I didn't think through all of that before. Um, and so I went to work. And that's when I started working at the University of West Indies. I got a job through somebody at church who worked in HR who helped me to get a job. You know what they say in Jamaica? It's good to have little connection.
Contact. Yes. One
And
hand
right,
wash the
and
other.
the church helped with that again, the power of
Yes.
environment,
Yes.
you know. Um, and so I went, and so to kind of go back just a slight, um, just a slight where we're coming from just now when we talked about exposure. I have come to
Mhm.
realize that exposure is even so much more valuable than even the launching pad, which is
That's
teaching
right.
and education.
Mhm.
Because you can teach something, but if that person can't reach it or feel what they're trying to attempt for, they will never get. And that's what happened. And that's what I found. And I saw that with people who I spoke to. I remember talking to one of my cousins, and he switched around his life, and he was saying to me, you know what? He said, cause he even came from even deeper in the garrison than I did. And he said,
Mhm.
cause I went on a trip, and they took us to a hotel, and he was in a hotel room. And people don't realize how significant those things are to kids who don't
Yes.
have any idea
Have n-
that feel like. And he said, cause from that moment, I said I going back to a hotel if it means I go. And
Mhm.
that was his driving force. That was his driving force, and he became
Mhm.
more kind of in tune with it with his educational progress, right? And excelled. Another situation I heard recently, I was talking to my friend at the time, um, Damian Crawford at the time, some years ago, and he was doing a camp at UWI, right? When he was a minister, he was doing some education. So he brought some kids from the deep rural areas, not even
Yeah.
garrison,
Yeah.
deep rural, and he put them up at the dorms to have like a math camp or something. And he told me that one day he couldn't get to a kid, and the kid went to take a shower, and hot water came. He came to him and said, so he noticed that he came to him and said, sir, is the hot water always available here? He said, that was the best shower I've taken in my whole life. I didn't know people bathe with hot
Yes.
water. Felt good. He said to
Yeah.
him, I am going to ensure that I come to you. See, his goal now was he knew that was where the hot water was. And he's like,
Yes.
we don't understand the power of those small things. And so I
Things.
think,
Yes.
like you said, exposure is so critical, because if we aren't exposed, right, how am I going to be a doctor if I'm not exposed to what it means to be a doctor or be in medicine or sit in the environment where doctors operate or have parents
Mhm.
who are doctors? There's no way. That's a harder time. You know what I'm saying? And so that was it for me. So I didn't know. So I went to, and then I got the exposure to what? Okay, so I was working, and what made me switch? I worked for 2 years. But what made me switch is that I looked at the environment that I was in and realized that there was no that was it. There was no that was a ceiling at that.
Progression.
Like, so how do I break through that ceiling? And so at the time, I said, oh, I probably really need to go back to school. So that was happening at work. And then I was still living in a tough environment. At that time, we were living off Mountain View Avenue. So I don't know if you've ever heard of Mountain View, whatever.
And to excel.
They just had a big issue the other day too with shootings, and I was watching it because sometimes I still watch my local news, and
Yeah.
I was like, wow, things never change. It's like, what, you think it's quiet, and the next day, that's because their
No.
environment will. If your
Family.
environment doesn't change, your actions
Okay.
won't change, and the things that occur within that environment won't change, right?
Mm.
So I was living there, and I remember playing soccer one evening, and I got into a little friction with a guy. And back then, you live in those areas, everybody going for something. And I was, I'm a church boy, but I was hacking too. I was like, no, you're in the heat of the moment, and if you got
Yeah.
no move, and I'm like, no move, and you're just going back and forth. You look back at it, and you say it's so silly because it's like, what was the point? But
But yeah.
what it did was, at that moment, I kid you not, he said he was going for something. I was being stubborn. So I was there. I had a cousin there with me. He said, yo, you should leave. And the guys from my area said, yeah, just go home. And I was like, all right, I'll just leave. So I was walking back by myself rather than walking with all the guys. No, nothing happened walking back by myself.
Oh,
I wasn't scared, but I was in reflective mode about what just happened. And it
mm,
was a sense of, I'm tired. I'm
wow.
tired of this. I'm tired of being in this environment. I need, you know, it's like the scripture said, plans to give you hope and a future. And I
Mm,
needed hope and I needed a future because I realized this wasn't it
it.
in that moment. I went home, literally walked through the gate. I will never forget. My mom was right there. And I just said to my mom, I said, Mom, I'm going to college. She said, What do you mean? She said, What do you mean? I said, I'm going to college. You know what her next thing was? So how will we afford college? I said, I don't know, but I'm going. I had no clue. I had no clue. I just made a decision, made a choice. That lesson told me that sometimes you just have to decide, right? I came up with this thing the other day called my 4D approach to making positive impact. And
Mm,
first thing I said was you have to dream, right? And dream, when you dream, you're just visualizing your future. You're visualizing what your potential and your goals are, right? But after dreaming is because many people dream. They don't realize they'll say things. You're dreaming. I want this car. I want to live in this home. And so you're dreaming. But to go to the next step, you have to decide. You have to just make a decision. You can't like, and so when I went into the house and I said, Mommy, I'm going to college, she said, Where's the money? I said, I don't know, Mom, but I'm going. And when I made a decision, the decision now means I have to design what that future is going to look like. So I started designing it in my mind. Okay, well, and then I chose I'm going to NCU, you know.
mm,
And I said, I'm going to NCU, a Christian university, maybe it will build character, stuff like that. It's far away from
mhm.
what I'm used to growing up in Kingston, won't be around the same friends and the same company and, the same energy. It should be different. And by the following week, I know I signed up application and everything. And when I decided to sign up that application, they were at their deadline. I think it was like by the time I was finished the Sunday with the application, I was supposed to go the Monday. And the other part of that story was my mother had sent me to, there was a time in my community there were people dying and they were killing people. Just people were just dying, like shooting kids. And so she was afraid, and it was boys and men. And she was just afraid that I was going to get caught up in it. Even if I wasn't doing anything, she believed that
In
I was.
anything, yeah.
She was trying to figure out where that I needed to go somewhere for a time. She started about my grandmother, and then I was talking to who is like a mother to me, and I don't know if you've ever heard of Audrey Sewell. She's now cabinet secretary. She was permanent secretary in the office of the prime minister, and she went to North Street too. So she had like, oh, she got an apartment, and she's there when she's working, so I could come stay with her. So that's where I was. I was working at UWE. I was staying with her for a little bit, and I filled out application. Now I had to take the application to my mother one day to sign it, and the deadline was the Monday, and I needed to catch somebody who was going to Mandeville who could drop it
Wonderful.
for me. When I went in there, because of my mom and my dad's situation, she left to go to her friend who was a hairdresser, and I had to wait. And I was like, oh my gosh, the timing. And while I was there waiting on her, because she had to sign it before I sent it, and she had left and she had locked her door. Right? She came out and she locked her door and whatever, and I had to wait. So I had to wait in the living room because she locked her room door. Because remember, I told you my father wasn't reliable. So that came with all kind of things. You
Never fit.
maybe
Yes.
taking things that he wasn't supposed to take. That happens all the time to fuel that habit. Um,
Yeah.
and so I think there was something else I was waiting and I needed to get from that room to, and she locked the room. I don't remember what it was, but the powerful point of that story is while I was there waiting on my mother, um, and it was getting late, and I was like, well, I don't want to be in here and then try to go back up to, because my auntie Audrey was at she lived at the foot of Beverly Hills, right there off Hope Road.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
so I was like, okay, I have to wait. And while I was waiting, the phone rang. I picked up the phone. It was my brother from Canada. He was in the US at the time. He had just finished Oakwood University, started working, got a good job with KPMG, which is one of the top 4 accounting firms in
But
the.
yes.
So he called. The way I am, my brothers lived overseas, but I would never call them for stuff, So I wasn't that type of person. I tried to figure it out. And he just called. And when he called, I said, Mommy's not here now. She went and she coming back. So and so I'm here waiting on her. And I didn't tell him anything about me planning to go to college. The next thing out of his mouth was, what you plan to do with college? I'm like, 2 years later, asking me this. You just finished and whatever you're asking about. And in my mind, I was like, so I said, oh, I'm actually here waiting on mommy to sign this paperwork because I need to get it because the deadline is tomorrow. He said, oh, you're going to school? He said, yeah. I said, I just decided. And he said, next thing out of his mouth, so how are you going to pay for it? I said, I don't know. I said, you must be a mother's child because why everybody asking me how I'm going to pay for it? Clearly, I don't know. But so he asked me and I was like, okay. I told him, I said, I don't know, but I'm going to go there. They said they have a work study program, so I'm going to try and figure it out and see what happens. I'm just jumping, And he said, oh, I was just calling because I tell you that, I'm in a better job now, so I'll be able to help you. So just let me know what the school fee is. That was it. There was where my money was coming from. But I didn't let it stand there. Because I told him, I said, oh, thank you so much. I said, I'm still going to go there though and look at job. And I'm going to work. Yeah. Whatever is left, I'll let you know. He said, okay, fine. Yeah. It's like, that's what he was like, just yes. I was going to pay everything. I was like, no, I need to do my little part. And so I was there and that's how I ended up getting into NCU. And the moment I went to NCU, I got a job at the cafeteria as a cashier. And which was cool because I did some cashier type work at the hospital too because I'm in
right
at the colic and I was like, oh, that's not bad. I don't have to work in the kitchen and wash pots and all of that. I'm just handling the money, which I was used to. And I did accounting in high school, and I went to school and I went to NCU and I signed up for accounting because at the moment that was the only thing I knew I was excelling at. But excelling at something don't mean that that's what you're created for.
You're right.
And that's what I learned later on in life, excelling at something. So you still have to find that fit as to that thing that gives you passion, that things that makes you just want to jump out, that you don't need an alarm clock to get out of bed to do it. And so I went to NCU and, I went there and I did. So my first year I did, and then I was elected into the student government body. The second year, and then the third year, I became the president of the student body. And it was also the third year. At that third year too, I became the president of the student body, but they also instituted where they gave us a scholarship. And the scholarship took care of my school fee. So I didn't even have to rely on my brother at that time. And even when I was the president and I didn't have to do that, I still worked at the CAF from time to time. So people would come and say, I'm the president of the student body. What are you doing in here? I'm like, well, used to it. Sometimes I just help out. If they like, I'll help out and I enjoy doing it. But suffice to say, I did my degree in 3 years. So I finished my degree in 3 years. It was a 4-year degree in 3 years. But I was like, the money part, I was like, no, I can't afford staying here for 4 years. So I got to get it done.
So let me ask you something now. Right. You've been at NCU, you've been student leader, you're making your waves. Did you think, okay, bachelor's, master's, doctorate, linear? You're not just president or former president of USM, you are Dr. Ryan Wiggan. How did you get there? I mean, you're coming from Garrison. How did you get to be Dr. Ryan Wiggan living in California?
So and that's it. So by the time I finished my degree in 3 years, somebody came from California and was recruiting. So I got a call from the student that person came specifically with my name and said, hey, I need to see you. Somebody told me about you and I wanted to meet you and we want to to help you to get to California to do a master's. I was like, this is very interesting because I didn't even know.
Look
First of all,
at God.
I didn't know what a bachelor's is. So now you bring a master's to me. I'm like, what the heck? Like I said, I didn't think that far. I didn't
Mm.
visualize that. Um, and though I'm grateful for where, I also feel like sometimes it was the timing. It slowed me down so much. But I said to myself now that everything in God's timing, because sometimes I feel like He builds you up. So sometimes when people feel like, oh, I should have had it in my 20s, I should have had it
Mm.
in my 30s. But we got to remember there's a lot of
Already.
people who society who never gave their contributions until their 40s, until their 60s, right? So you have to allow, in the meantime, all these experiences, right? All these things that you have encountered and been through. These are the things that are building you up to execute your true moment. It's like looking at Usain Bolt, 4 years to run a 1 9 second race. So you're training for 4 years to run 1 9 second race, and that
Mm.
has to change history, right?
History.
Simple,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
I have to keep that in mind. So when I did the 2 year degree, so because I was in USM, I think I did pretty well as a student leader. If you ask other people, I don't want to blow, but people said that to me, and people said that, and I was like, so what resonated with me is like based on the feedback that I got, I realized that I had impact, and that was something that I was always passionate about, being impactful, being able to influence the lives of others, you know. Um, and so after that 2 year stint, um, I was starting, and he came in the third year and introduced me to the master's program. I said, now remember, when I just became USM president, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. Didn't know what
Oh,
that was. I was trying to. My mom knew me better than I realized she knew me, because when I found out that she had breast cancer, after she spoke to me, she had her friend, her good friend, call me and said, Ryan, whatever you're thinking of doing, do not do
mm,
it. I
do
said,
it.
I said, what do you mean? She said, your mother know you're going to try and come home,
Mm.
right? She know you're going. No, she said she does not want you to do that.
Take on.
Want you to still focus. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm like, that year I was starting to be the student president. My mother is diagnosed with, and a lot of students didn't know that. And I still found a
Yes.
way to execute that, try and be there for my mom, and
Mm.
while fulfilling her wishes. Long and short of
Yeah.
the story, I was able to finish with her. She was in remission at the time. She was
Mission.
able to come to my graduation, so that was a great moment. That was the only graduation of all my degrees that she was able to be there
Be able
for.
to come. Yes.
Was there for one. And I remember just sitting there, she was there, and I remember just sitting there, and I don't know how many people saw me, but I was just crying. I was just sitting in my seat and I was just crying because I was just looking back at the journey, and I was like, I just can't believe it. I can't believe I got this far. I can't believe I was able to finish within the time that I finished. So now I start realizing my passion to be there for people and to help people. So when I transitioned to last year in California, I was doing a master's and I was doing an MBA. So I was like, oh, a business degree. Everybody say, having a master's is good. But so
Yes. Yes.
I was not settled in my mind because I was like, I don't want to do it.
Mm.
What can I doing? I said, I'm not doing accounting. I said, I can do it and I'm good at it, but this is not what I
The
was taught.
passion.
This is not my passion. I don't feel that it is.
Mm.
And then I spoke to one of the professors there, and he said, "Yeah, you don't have to do." He said, "We have all these other programs." And I said, "Yeah, I'm thinking about doing general management." And he said, "Why would you do?" He said, "General management is so generic. Anybody can be a manager. I wouldn't advise you." And he said, "Do a skill area." So I was just guessing and spelling. I said, "What about marketing?" He said, "That might be good." I did the marketing, I finished it, but it wasn't something that I realized that that's on me, because when I started
Mm.
looking at jobs and stuff, it just there was no fit. I had to go through the whole sales thing and all of that, and I'm like, that's not a fit for me. But the truth is, because of my experience working as an administrator, like from a student leader standpoint, I really like that. I really like being able to impact. student lives, you know. And so I started visualizing a plan that I wanted to go back into educational administration. And so even before I finished the master's, I was having discussions with the School of Education about the doctoral program. I told them, I don't know what the doctoral program is. I don't know what to do. I just know that it may help me enhance to get to that place. Um, and so that was one of my my struggles. Like I just, you know, I was just trying to find that fit because I know I was already behind the curve because I was not planning these steps from an earlier age. I was figuring them out as I went along, and I'm still doing that today because I can say to you that I went and I started teaching. I started being an adjunct faculty, and somewhere somehow God led it that I ended up in healthcare back, and I'm like, how did I end up healthcare back? You know, and I started doing training in healthcare, and then from training, I ended up in tech. And I'm like, but I realized that while I was doing that, and I'm still doing that to some degree, I am building stuff where I can go more full time into my, speaking engagements, coaching and stuff like that, because that is really where my passion is. So I love to share my story. You know, I love to, because I realize that you went through this for a reason, right? But not
Yes.
only that,
Yes.
I'm constantly involved I've served as a president of the Northern Caribbean University alumni chapter here. I love doing things like that. I recently got included in as a VP for the Jamaica Awareness Association of California, that does a lot of mission trips and educational stuff for underserved areas in Jamaica, and I love that. And I'm continuing to build that. I'm continuing to build that rapport with groups like that, and learning and still learning, because one of the things, you know, at NCU it says where learning never ends, and that's another thing that really resonates with me to this day, that learning never ends, and we're continuing learning. My environment now has transitioned more into, I love reading, and I love reading certain books, and I have certain persons in history that I have looked up to. Not all are going to be Seventh Day Adventists. I mean, probably there is none that Seventh Day Adventist, but they still influence me. I remember one of the first leaders that influenced me surprisingly was Malcolm X, and you know how that happened? That was a trip. This is why I tell you about exposure. That
Culture.
that Wilmers had. I think they were doing it around the high schools in Jamaica when the Malcolm X movie came out. They were doing something for the high schools. They did that twice. They did that with Malcolm X, and they did that with the movie called Amistad, about that slave trade ship. And when I watched, I said, there was a person in history like this. When I thought about, after that, it led me down to reading his books and all of that. And I'm like,
Yes.
wow.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yes.
I learned more about him. What I loved about him was the strength of character and his resilience
Mhm.
to just be to be this person who, though he had a bad start in life, he wanted to, he you could tell that from his birth he was created for something special.
Destined. Yes.
Even so,
Yes.
the skill sets that he used as a civil rights person or a freedom fighter, were the
Mhm.
same
An
skills that
advocate.
he used. Yeah, it was the same skill in a life of crime, being able to influence
Yes.
people, having people follow it. You understand? So
Really.
I was
Yes.
saying
Yes.
to someone yesterday, that's the thing that we don't realize. I was talking to a friend who's a correctional officer, well, retired correctional officer. He was telling me some of his stories, and I said, "The good thing is you love to fight when you were a youngster. You got in trouble
Yeah.
fighting
It's,
all the time, and God
yeah.
put it that you could use those skill sets. Those were your gifts all along. You were just using it
Yes. Yeah.
wrong because
Wrong way.
needed you to be in the correctional system. That's just it.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's where it stood from. That's where I stand right now, and I continue to, because everybody think that things are based off titles and careers and stuff like that. It's really what we do with the potential that we were given. It's really what we do to live out our true purpose that is important.
Ladies and gentlemen, we've been listening to Dr. Ryan Wiggan. You know, we have sat here, and usually we end within an hour,
That's what I
but
thought.
your story, we normally end within an hour, but your story has been so riveting and so compelling
Mhm,
and so inspirational. I'm sure that you've poured into people today. I was thinking about it, and I'm thinking from garrison to graduate.
mhm,
You've spoken about having dreams and designs, but not just dreaming, but deciding and designing your way forward.
mhm.
You've spoken about resilience, and you've spoken about having passion, and you've spoken about your independent spirit, your competitive spirit, but also the fact that you're not about keeping everything to yourself. It's about paying it forward and
Yes.
sharing,
Mhm.
pouring into others. You know, I want to ask you one final question before we go. How my program is entitled "It Is Possible," and I
Powerful.
want to it. I want thank you. I want you to tell me what this means to you. It is possible based on where your life is. What does "it is possible" mean to you?
Yeah, when I saw when you sent me and I didn't, I know we talked about the show, but I didn't know what the show was called, and then you sent me the link and I saw it is possible. And that is really that is really a central focus to who I am and what I am trying to represent, especially to those who pretty much have come from similar circumstances that I have, and you have people that are from that are the same age as I am that have not pretty much accomplished. So when we say it is possible, people because we are not, and we go back to that word, because we've not been exposed to certain things, because we've not had positive experience in our lives, we tend to give up on our dreams because we don't think it is
Mm.
right. And so
Wow.
when we listen to the stories, and I would complete that 4D approach that I was telling you to a positive change, right? Because we talked about dreaming and I talked about designing that plan. Part of that was going to school, doing whatever degrees, getting the education that I needed. But the third one is doing, right? You gotta act. You gotta
Yes.
act on what you act. And last but not least, I said we have to be able to duplicate those steps, because creating habits are what is essential to what is possible,
Mhm.
right? It is what is
Yes.
essential to what is possible. And so when you duplicate, that's where discipline comes from. Because sometimes when we tell people you have to have discipline, discipline is not something that is predetermined, like you go by it and say, hey, I have discipline. Discipline really comes from creating the right habits. That's what it is. That your life is constantly echoing that which you're trying to do. And then it might not seem that way. It might not seem that you're going anywhere, but believe me, because that is it with me. Like I told you, there's something I didn't know how I got there, but I really do, because I was just putting one foot in front of the other. And that's what I remember Kobe saying in that interview too. He said he did his training. He wasn't afraid of failing. He said it's better to just put one foot in front of the other and see what happens. Because if you don't, then you would never know. So it's better to try and to fail than
Yes.
to never
Then
try
never try.
and don't know.
Yes.
But it is
Yes.
possible. It is possible. And that is where it comes from. But we have to understand, and I go back to that it is a journey, it is a process. And we have become a society that is over time being that we don't believe in the process anymore. Everybody wants things, or most people want things microwave. We want it quickly, we want it now, we want the instant gratification. Everything that you do, but looking at it, I'm like, man, I'm 40 years in and I'm still on my journey, and I'm sure you are too on your journey, right? With this
Yes.
podcast,
Yes.
you're
Yes.
finding ways to create impact. And I came up with a little meaning for my impact. I put it in an acronym. What is impact to me is individuals making positive, actionable changes together.
Wow.
And so we have,
Individuals making positive, actionable changes together.
right?
Lovely.
And so if don't just sit in the corner and think that you're doomed. There is so much resources. Find that environment. your environment may even exist right here in a book, right?
Yes, yes,
Um,
yes,
you know,
yes.
and I have in front of me Malcolm X said, people don't realize how a man's whole life can be
It's
changed
changed
by
by
one.
reading one book.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Oh,
it is possible.
wonderful.
I love it. I love the name, and continue to do positive things. And I hope it will continue I hope my story will impact somebody's life.
I
And
know it will. I know it has.
yes,
Dr. Wiggan, Dr. Ryan Wiggan, it has been an absolute pleasure having you on the program this evening.
I
It is
appreciate.
Possible Tuesday. You
Mm-hmm.
know, God is good. With God, all things are possible. And we
Amen.
do encourage people to remember that once there is life, there is possibility.
Yes.
So we encourage everybody to be a believer
Mm-hmm.
and to be a doer. This
Yes.
evening, we've had Dr. Ryan Wiggan talking to us about making positive impact,
Mm-hmm.
about making actionable changes together,
Mm-hmm.
about paying it forward, about not dimming your light, but making sure you're exposing yourself, duplicating your actions, going back to the blueprint, designing, dreaming, doing, being disciplined, but definitely never staying still.
No,
Dr. Wigan, it has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much
thank
for
you for having.
coming on to the program.
Thank you
And
for.
I do wish you continued blessings and more open doors and more of God's timing as you fulfill your purpose. Thank
I
you ever so much for being with us today on
I,
It Is Possible Tuesdays with Sanyo.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Blessings,
All right.
blessings. Oh, thank you ever so much. I am sure that when we close, we'll be able to see all the persons who have been inspired and touched and encouraged by what you have said this evening. I absolutely am blown away by everything that you have experienced, and just seeing how God has worked out his purpose in your life. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
It is possible, and you are definitely a true representation of what is possible when you make yourself available.
Thank you.
So thank you, and have a very wonderful evening.
All right.
Thank you.
All right.
Oh, lovely. I'm going to ask Mr. PW to take us out if he is still with me this evening. I know we have gone outside of our usual hour. We've actually done 93 minutes, so thank you.
Yes.
Philip, can you take us out now? I'm hoping that Philip is still with me.
I'm hoping.
Um,
All things
yeah.
are possible. I can mount on wings like